Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into the fascinating historical and material origins of the most widely translated book in human history. We're looking at the Bible today not just as a religious text, but as an absolutely incredible archaeological artifact. How did it actually survive? And more importantly, based on the historical record, is it reliable? Let's investigate exactly how it weathered empires, skeptics, and the ravages of time. To kick things off, we really have to ask the ultimate critical questions. Who wrote it? On what? And who exactly decided which books made the cut? Skeptics and scholars alike have wrestled with these exact points for centuries. So we're going to unpack the hard evidence to see exactly how this ancient collection of documents arrived on our modern bookshelves. Section 1. Ancient Writing Materials. To really grasp the text reliability, we have to start with the physical evidence and the raw materials that ancient scribes used long before the printing press ever existed. When you look at the sheer variety of ancient technologies used, the survival of these texts is astounding. Initially, words were recorded on highly fragile Egyptian papyrus, which, fun fact, is actually where we get the word Bible, named after the ancient port city of Byblos. But because papyrus breaks down so easily, scribes eventually shifted over to parchment, which is treated sheep or goat skin. And for the most treasured, premium manuscripts, they used vellum, a very fine calfskin. History didn't just sit around waiting for modern paper. People used the absolute cutting-edge technology of their era to record these words. And this transition illustrates a massive leap forward in that technology. Early Christians actually drove practical innovation here by quickly abandoning those cumbersome single-sided scrolls. Just think about it for a second. A scroll could be up to 144 feet long. Imagine trying to find and cross-reference a specific sentence in that massive thing just to check for accuracy. Instead, they enthusiastically adopted the codex, which is basically a bound book with folded pages that you could write on both sides of. It was highly portable, making it absolutely perfect for traveling missionaries who needed to carry the text across the ancient world and quickly compare passages. Now, let's look at the handwriting itself. The earliest manuscripts were written in what scholars call uncial script, and if you've ever seen it, it's all capital letters with absolutely no spaces between the words. No spaces. To make any sense of it, you literally had to read it aloud, syllable by syllable. It wasn't until the 9th century that scribes developed minuscule script, a smaller, cursive-style writing that was so much faster to copy and allowed these manuscripts to spread way more efficiently without losing their structure. Which brings us to Section 2, Formatting and Navigation. If ancient texts had no spaces, no punctuation, and in the case of Hebrew, not even vowels, where in the world did our modern reading tools come from? Well, following this timeline actually surprises a lot of people, especially when they're questioning if the text was historically altered. The tools we use to navigate the text today are actually pretty modern additions. Between the 5th and 10th centuries, a group of incredibly meticulous Jewish scribes known as the Massoretes finally added Hebrew vowels. Later on, in 1227 AD, a university professor named Stephen Langton added the chapter divisions, and then in 1551, a printer named Robert Stephanus added verses, reportedly while riding on horseback, which is pretty amazing. So the crucial takeaway here is that context is everything. A chapter break isn't some inspired break in thought, it's simply a navigational tool added centuries later to help you find your place. Section 3. Who picked the books? Okay. This is perhaps the single biggest critical question we hear from skeptics. Out of all the ancient writings floating around the Mediterranean back then, who decided which 66 books belonged in the text? To get our heads around this, we first need to define the word canon. It literally comes from the Greek word canon, meaning a measuring rod or a standard. In a historical context, it refers to the strict standard used to evaluate a text to determine if it truly belonged in the official list recognized as divinely inspired. And this brilliantly illustrates a core historical fact that honestly gets misunderstood all the time by critics. As scholars Giesler and Nix put it, the church did not create the canon. The church recognized it. Early church councils didn't just sit in a smoke-filled room and vote the Bible into existence to consolidate their political power. Rather, they were simply recognizing and officially recording the text that had already naturally established their authority and reliability among early believers over hundreds of years. Section 4. 5 tests for canonicity. So how exactly did those early leaders test these books to verify their historical and spiritual authenticity? What was their measuring rod? Well, early Christians applied a highly strict 5-point forensic test. First up, apostolic authority. Was it actually written by a prophet or an apostle?
Second, was the author confirmed by signs or miracles? Third, does it tell the truth without any contradictions? Their standard rule of thumb was basically, when in doubt, throw it out. They were highly skeptical of forgeries. Fourth, did the book have the empirical power to transform lives? And fifth, was it widely received and used by the early church communities? It was a rigorous, intense vetting process designed specifically to weed out historical errors.
Section 5. Settling the Canon. Let's trace exactly how both the New and Old Testaments historically settled into the precise collection we're examining today. Looking at the New Testament timeline, it's abundantly clear that this wasn't decided in one quick meeting. It emerged through centuries of organic convergence. By AD 180, figures like Irenaeus were already confirming the Gospels and Paul's letters. By AD 367, Athanasius listed the exact 27 books we have today. And finally, the councils of Hippo and Carthage formalized those lists in the late 4th century. It paints this fascinating forensic picture of different regions and cultures independently verifying the text and arriving at the exact same 27 books. But what about the Old Testament? A major question skeptics always ask is why certain ancient texts, like the Apocrypha, are excluded by certain traditions but included by others. Did somebody try to go in and edit history? Well, books like the Apocrypha, which include texts like Tobit and Maccabees, were ultimately excluded from the historic Jewish and Protestant canons for some very specific reasons. They just were not accepted by traditional Jewish scholars of that era. They contain known historical inaccuracies. Jerome, the famous translator of the Latin Vulgate, explicitly opposed including them, and perhaps most notably, they were never once quoted by Jesus or the New Testament authors, who, by the way, quoted the rest of the Old Testament hundreds of times. In fact, one of the absolutely most powerful historical arguments for the reliability of the Old Testament canon is that Jesus himself explicitly endorsed its exact structure. In Luke chapter 24, he referenced everything written in the Law of Moses and the Prophets and the Psalms, which perfectly matches the traditional 3-part structure of the Hebrew Bible. He accepted the canon exactly as it stood in history, offering us a crucial data point for historical verification. So, when you take a step back and really look at the empirical evidence we've covered in this explainer, from the remarkably fragile papyrus fragments preserved in completely dry caves, to the rigorous 5-point vetting criteria and the thousands of meticulously copied manuscripts, it's an absolutely incredible journey of survival against staggering odds. As the theologian Bernard Rahm so famously noted, the funeral bell has tolled for the Bible 1,000 times. The burial procession has formed. The tombstone has been engraved. And yet, the corpse never stays in the grave. It's such a striking way to summarize how, despite centuries of empires, philosophers, and skeptics actively trying to dismantle or bury it, this text simply refuses to fade away. So having examined the historical and forensic origins of this remarkable text today, I want to leave you with this. Based on the raw evidence we've covered, the ancient materials, the meticulous copying processes, the rigorous canonization tests, what piece of the puzzle do you find the absolute most compelling about how this text survived? Think about it and let that spark your own continued investigation.